Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Policy Perspectives by Bridge Policy Think Tank. In Policy Perspectives, we generally conduct interviews of revolutionaries in the policy space who have helped in creating new frontiers for policy dissemination, policy creation, and advocacy. And today we have with us uh, Alpana Killawala. Alpana Killawala is a former senior officer of the Reserve Bank of India. She is a journalist and she is best known for revolutionizing the space of banking and finance, regulatory, communication, narrative building, and storytelling. Three of my three favorite words, especially in terms of the way RBI communicated its policies in some very exciting times. Ma'am has recently written a very interesting book called A Fly on the RBI Wall, denoting her, there you have it, denoting it's just a really interesting take on her experience with the RBI. You have to note that generally you'll get books on what happens inside the closed, big, heavy doors of RBI only from former governors. And so, ma'am's book is in a league of its own. And we are here today to discuss uh, narrative building, storytelling in policy making, and Alpana ma'am's experience working with the Reserve Bank of India. I thank all my attendees for joining us live. Uh, and so, ma'am, let's just jump right to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure, Kritika.
Um, Ma'am, it's very interesting that before joining RBI, you were actually a journalist and you used to write very regularly for the banking and finance sector. And in your book, you write how you always remained a journalist at heart throughout your time at RBI. And all of us who have had experience with RBI know that it's generally a very stiff upper lip kind of a culture, And so, how did you keep your spirit alive? And how did you bring in your journalistic spirit in RBI by doing all these, good initiatives with the communications department? If you could please tell us.
Actually, it's very, very incorrect to think or to say that RBI has a stiff upper lip. It's a very, very warm organization within. And each and every individual, it's like a family, like any other organization would be. And working in the RBI felt like you're part of the family. So the stiff upper lip kind of impression that is there outside is probably because the RBI doesn't speak very much. It doesn't communicate in terms of whatever it does, its actions. And partly this comes out of the role that it has been assigned, that a monetary policy, for instance. RBI cannot go out and say outright in the open that no, we are going to raise interest rates, or we are going to keep it neutral, or we are going to lower the interest rates ahead of time. It will speak only when the time comes and when the decision is made within the given circumstances. Another example, banking supervision and regulation. RBI cannot go out and say in the public that, oh, XYZ bank is weak, please withdraw your deposit, because it becomes like marte ko maar type of attitude, Mar raha hai bichara, bank is almost on the verge of closing down because of its own doing. And if RBI, like regulator, says it out in the open, then it will die sooner than it is expected to. So that given that kind of role, RBI doesn't speak or communicate a lot. And therefore, it has built up this kind of stiff upper lip kind of an impression. But believe me, it's a very, very warm organization. Coming to the second part of your question as to how I managed to keep my journalistic spirits alive within the RBI, you're right. It is very easy to get drawn into that self indulgence when you join an organization like RBI, especially because, as I earlier said, it communicates very little. So it's very, very easy to absorb that language, that very technically correct kind of a language. And it is very easy to be drawn into the way the RBI behaves within the within itself. But as a journalist, I used to meet a lot of people outside and talk to them and get their views and absorb those views and then write about it. So that spirit I kept alive. The second part of it, the language that we use as journalists, which is very easy to communicate with the world outside. You communicate very technical things as a journalist, and that's why you are an interlocutor. So I retained that language, which turned out to be quite fresh from the RBI's point of view, because when I started touching up the press releases in the RBI and before issuing it, the journalists would love it because it was so easy for them to understand what the RBI is trying to say. And the third thing which I kept alive was my inquisitiveness as a journalist. I kept searching, I kept looking out for information that went around, and that gave me an upper hand in terms of accessing information within the RBI. And that helped me in communicating with the journalists, because whenever they asked me a question, I was able to respond to them on the spot, because I keep collecting that information and storing it in my mind somewhere, so that when there is a question, you're able to answer. So these three things helped me a great deal as a communicator from the RBI.
But ma'am, you were one of the first special recruitees of RBI. And when you were recruited, technically, there was no real KPI, there was no real definition of what you guys are going to do. And so, did it give you any benefit or autonomy, or did it make it even more tougher that before trying out any new thing, you had to be like, let me put up a file and get an approval for this, because I don't know whether it's even part of my job profile. So, was it a tougher nut to crack due to the lack of clarity of your profile? And what was your role in helping RBI define the entire communication strategy?
Actually, I would say both. It helped me a lot because there was no proper definition of the role that I was supposed to undertake. And it also helped me in the sense, or didn't help me in the sense that there was nothing to look back upon. I was just thrown into the water, and then I had to learn swimming. It was as simple as that. And but I think it helped me more than it created a problem, because no one told me what to do. I just kept on grabbing opportunities as they came my way. And fortunately for me, two things. One, I entered the RBI at a very, very crucial time, just when we had undertaken the economic reforms program. And reforms were happening on three fronts: trade reforms, economic reforms, and to go with trade reforms, we had also undertaken for ourselves monetary policy area reforms. So there was a lot to do, there was a lot to communicate, and there was the governors, each one after the other, were very, very sensitive and conscious of the need to communicate with the world outside. And like I have said in the book, Dr. Jalan once remarked that when I said I just did my job, he was thanking me for whatever I did. for him in terms of communication. So I said, I just did my job. And he said, no, your being there helped. And I think that was very true because it's generally very difficult to find a combination of domain knowledge plus good communication skill, which fortunately I happen to have. And therefore, it just so happened that I was the right person at the right place at the right time. And that I think is true when we say that, I successfully changed the communication of RBI and all that. It just so happened that I got the opportunity and I did it. That's it.
I mean, this just came to me, but the exact thing that you said, that having domain expertise and being able to communicate it in a very nice fashion is a very, very rare quality. And nowadays, ma'am, we have this new generation of writers. All of them are trying to write in this era for social media. They're trying to be knowledge writers and content creators online. And they're trying to be meaningful. At the same time, they have very small windows to communicate, which I'm sure was the case with you as well. I mean, the crisis guide did not just call you up and say 1 month later we are going to cause a crisis, so just start typing now. So, how do you create meaningful? If you had to give like a few pointers to the younger generation of how to generate domain expertise, how do you increase your knowledge, at the same time you create meaningful content in short urgent periods of time, what would be your advice to them?
Reading, reading, reading. There is no shortcut. Of course, being in an organization or knowledge institution like the RBI helps because you breathe central banking there. Working for almost 7, 8, 10 hours in a day, each day, in and out. I used to breathe central banking, and that's where my understanding of central banking comes from. That, whenever you're talking to friends, you're talking to you and colleagues, and whatever is happening, you keep your eyes and ears open all the time and keep listening to what's happening in the organization. It's not that it's not your job, and your knowledge gathering is not. And of course, I was interested in the subject also because as a journalist I was finding or rather filing reports on all these, banking, central banking, finance. So that understanding was there, that curiosity was there about the subject, and I loved knowing about financial markets and monetary policy, and then later on picked up on banking supervisory aspects also. Little complicated because I'm not a chartered accountant or a company secretary or something, but if you put your mind to it, you understand it. And there were friends and colleagues who helped understanding. Never be afraid of asking questions. Even basic questions I would go and ask. And today when I look back, I feel that how they must have thought, "Okay, isko itna bhi nahi malum hai." And she was doing communication in central banking. But I was never afraid. I was never shy of asking questions. Go to the lowest down in the hierarchy and ask questions if that was required. So these 2, 3 things help a lot. Reading, whatever came my way, I never left without reading it. So first I would read everything and then ask questions, try to understand and keep my ears and eyes open to the information flow that happened in the organization. Even passing through the lift, you're coming out of lunchroom and going back to your room, you're traveling in the lift, you keep listening to that conversation. Like I heard about Rupee fall. Rupee fell one of those days very sharply, and everybody was concerned about it and all. And the dealing room staff was going with me in the lift to their back to their room, and they were talking about it, that hedging karna hai, ye karna hai, wo karna hai, all these you keep hearing and you pick up. So that is how I would tell the youth, the younger generation today, that There's no shortcut. Please don't ever try to find it. Just read a lot, just keep listening to it, and never shy of asking good questions.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think that's going to be really helpful for them. Uh, there are instances in the book where you've indulged in details of managing a crisis. For example, when there was a 1991 balance of payments crisis, part loans were borrowed from England and Japan while we already were defaulting on previous repayment obligations. You know, can you tell us more about this instance and how crucial it is? We generally think that maintaining foreign policies is a domain of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs only. But how crucial it was for RBI, and if you could tell us that story.
Communication is a support role. So it just so happened that when all these things were happening, the negotiations and the governor talking to Bank of Japan and governor talking to the politicians or the government for transporting of gold and all, much of the balance of payments crisis was behind me when I joined the RBI. But as I described in the book, only one episode that happened, and I very clearly remembered that there was when Mr. Venkatramanan, who was the governor at that time, spoke to Bank of Japan governor on the phone. And that time, all this internet and mobile phone and all these were not there. So it was like a landline phone, and he spoke, and I happened to be sitting in front of me. I'd gone for some work, some whatever he had called me for. And I just happened to hear his side of the story. But as a journalist, like I said, I keep my journalistic spirit alive. So that there was this great skill of putting one and one together and making it 11. So he spoke very softly. That was Mr. Venkatramanan. He spoke very softly. So he spoke to someone and he said, okay, I'll tell my colleagues to get in touch with you. I'm so grateful to you, or some similar kind of conversation. He put the phone down and then he picked up the intercom and called up the department concerned and said, I have spoken to Bank of Japan governor and he has agreed to give whatever amount of loan that he had agreed to give. Just be in touch with the department and get it organized. So I put one and one together and knew that he has just managed within that half a minute. He has organized a loan of some millions of dollars for the help in balance of payments situation. And then there was this whole thing, and through State Bank we organized, and then of course in Dr. Jalan's time we gathered so much of foreign exchange that he made a public statement just before going that whatever we faced in 1991, that kind of crisis we will never ever face again. We have built that kind of solid foundation. And it felt a great joy and a great pride that, as a central bank, you could do this much. And it was just a phone call, just one-to-one relationship of the governor with that Bank of Japan governor that this was organized. And this was something that I couldn't believe, but I witnessed it myself. So there was no question of not believing.
So I really feel, ma'am, that it could happen because we did not have internet and emails and and DMs and WhatsApp. I mean, the value of one-to-one communication, knowing people because you're talking to them on the phone, is absolutely very different, and it's very watered down once you just write emails and now, can you please give me a loan of this $1 million on email and having a one-on-one?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, uh, so I think those are very interesting times and very interesting people that you worked with, and you talk about how you literally, you literally built the communications department crisis after crisis. And you talk about how RBI as an institution has evolved in the aftermath of crisis, it's just grown and become stronger. And it always, every time we see, even now when we study the policies of RBI, they will keep studying the market, and they will keep learning from the market. And then even if there is a crash, they will actually get lessons from it and build up their policies, which is, something that makes them so special. And so, can you give us a few examples and tell us how this was made possible, and how, give us a few stories about these crises and how, we learned from them?
Um, no whole book on this, so it's difficult to just stop at two examples or
Your
three
favorite?
examples. But yeah, but I'll give you a couple of examples. I'll go absolutely to the beginning in the 1990s and talk about Harshad Mehta scam. That scam happened mainly because there was no electronic trading at that time. It was all physical. So government securities, the banks bought directly in the auctions and all. And then when trading happened, so one bank sold the securities to the other, they would have to submit the documents, the form and the securities to the RBI, so that RBI would, which was keeping a physical ledger book for each government security and each time the hands changed. So it would enter it into that register, and that the ownership of so-and-so security has changed from A to B, and then give it back to B. Now, in between, there would be some kind of tacha receipt issued by the RBI to bank B, saying that, okay, you have given me these securities to transfer it to your name. So this is the receipt. And then they would have to bring back the receipt and then take away the government securities duly transferred to its own name. Now, this was a process, and the entire thing, bankers wouldn't come to the RBI. It was the broker who had brokered the deal who would come to the RBI, give those documents, take the receipt, go back, bring back the receipt 3 days later, give it to RBI, and then take the securities back and give it to the. This was the normal circumstances. Now, somebody like Harshad Mehta, who was smart, he knew that this is a system, and he was greedy for money, cash, so that he could invest it in stock market and earn a lot of money. Now, stock market again at that time was not T+1, not T+0. It was T+3. And the whole market was ruled by what at that time they used to call Badla. So Badla market doesn't require physical delivery of stocks. You just bid for some stock, buy them, quote unquote, pay the money, which is the Badla finance, not the full money. And then by the time 3 days later, when settlement was going to take place, you unwind your position. In between whatever days, and you keep the stock with yourself, whatever appreciation happens and whatever, the earnings happen, that's all yours for at the cost of only Badla finance, which is a small amount of funds. So this is what Harshad Mehta used to do. He would take the securities, give it to RBI. Now he knew that 3 days later, these securities are going to come back. So he would take the banker's receipt that the RBI has issued, go to another bank and say that these are the securities, give me cash. And that cash he would put in the Badla market and then earn money and reverse the whole thing at when the time of delivery came. So this is how funding was happening, and this is how government securities market was antiquated in terms of physical, ledger maintenance and all that. Harshad Mehta scam, the whole Janki Raman committee report and, some 7, 8 reports were there. And they went into technicalities of how it happened and where and how, the nitty-gritty of each deal and all that. And that's when they realized that this was the loophole that was getting exploited. So the whole thing gave rise to electronic journal keeping. So the whole subsidiary general ledger that we used to keep in physical form became electronic. And we started what we call delivery versus payment system. So you make payment and take delivery. You make delivery and you take payment. There was no gap of that 3 days in between, because now we could expedite the whole thing being electronic. So that's how the whole reform in government securities market took place, thanks to one scam called Harshad Mehta scam. So that's one episode of how the institution evolved. Let me give you another example, uh, which illustrates how ingenuine the governors were in their thinking. There was another scam called Ketan Parekh scam. Now that again was a stock market scam, but the germ of it was in a cooperative bank, which was the largest cooperative bank based in Gujarat. And there were a lot of smaller cooperative banks which were attached with that bank because they had kept their deposits with this Madhavpura bank. Now, what happened was we stumbled upon this because the Harshad Mehta scam had taught us to monitor the data, the trade data, and we were constantly monitoring all the time. There was somebody who kept an eye on the data and what's happening. And there was this bank, smaller cooperative bank called Madhavpura Bank, which was very active in money market. And it was borrowing huge sums of money. So our antenna went up as to what is happening in this bank. And when we started checking, we realized that it's a big corporate fraud. And Ketan Parekh was utilizing this bank's money to invest in stock market and then, make hay. So we stopped that, and it was a very difficult proposition because there were a lot of smaller cooperative banks associated with this bank. So if we were to do anything with this bank, Madhavpura Bank, it would hurt the hundreds of cooperative banks based in Gujarat who were linked with that bank somehow. So that domino effect would kill the cooperative sector as such. So we had to be very careful, and we managed that Madhavpura Bank crisis. As a result of that crisis, what happened was we started reforming the cooperative sector. And in cooperative sector, there is a challenge because cooperative sector is, even if it's cooperative banking sector, there are 3 regulators involved. One is the center, the cooperative department. It's a joint subject, center and state together. So the center cooperative department, the state cooperative department, and the RBI. So regulation would happen by the RBI, supervision also RBI now through NABARD it will do. And the inspection report will go for implementation to the state registrar of cooperative societies because administrative action was given to them. So that's how the rot in the cooperative sector spread because, a government would normally not understand the importance of changing the management so quickly. So it would take its own time. Inspection report of an RBI was like, aaya hai types, so nobody would pay immediate attention to that. And then within the 2-3 years that would pass through, the management would know about this report. So it would take away all the money that it had invested in that bank and vanish, leaving the poor depositor to suffer. So what we did was, and this is Dr. Reddy, who was the governor at that time, his brainchild. It's very difficult to reform cooperative sector because there are political interests involved in the cooperative sector. And he knew very well, he knew that governments are not going to give up their control. It's a cash cow. Deposits keep coming for 4.5% all throughout. So nobody would like to leave that space. So what he did was he devised what he called the Memorandum of Understanding. And he set up a committee in each state, which we call, even it's existing even today, TAFCAM, which is a technical advisory committee for cooperative banking sector. And the members were all those who are involved in decision making for a cooperative bank. So they would gather at the same place at the same time and to take decisions about A or B or C cooperative bank or the banking system in the particular state. And then decisions, when they are taken there and then the cooperative sector will look up. So the rot will be stepped, so to say. And what we gave in return was a good amount of fund for technological upgradation of that particular banks in the particular state. So we started signing that agreement with each and every state. Today, probably most of the states are on board with that memorandum of understanding signed. We have given funds for technology upgradation, which has become better. And all Dr. Reddy said was, Ma, this is a very small price to pay for if the cooperative sector is going to reform through this. So some training on corporate governance, some funds for technology upgradation, and what we got in return was the stemming of the rot in the cooperative banking sector. So I would give full credit to ingenuity of these governors who ruled the RBI, so to say, or the banking and finance space, and brought about reforms at each and every opportunity that came by their way.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I mean, when you speak, we get an understanding of how it is so important to really just understand that there are these small tweaks, and in a way, they are all so strongly related to communication. Just put all the decision makers in a committee, and automatically things streamline. Make it compulsory for them to talk to each other, and
Absolutely,
things improve.
absolutely. Yes.
And now talking about the cooperative banks, for example, we have so many departments in RBI, and they have evolved. The internal structure of RBI itself has evolved a lot, and technically, the internal structure, the way it evolves, impacts the market participants, the market players, and their advisors as well. Uh, so, for example, recently, Department of Banking Supervision and Non-Banking Supervision were merged to make a Department of Supervision.
Yes.
And but this is just so basic, considering the entire, thing that you have seen how RBI as an institution, uh, you know, various departments within RBI would either end up being bound up completely or being merged with a similar department. So, in those times, in the 90s and afterwards, how different was, and for example, tech was not that important. Now you have a department of fintech completely different from other departments, which is much more proactive. And much more communicative, and talks its mind more often than others. So tell us more about how it used to be, what were the departments, and how different was the structure and hierarchy when you first joined, and that was different as compared to when you left. If you could tell us a bit more on that.
Yeah, sure. I'll illustrate the hierarchical nature of the RBI with one example that happened with me. In RBI, every lady is madam. So you don't the culture. It's an inward-looking organization and a very hierarchical for that matter. So today somebody is my colleague and I call her by her name, and tomorrow I'm promoted and I become her senior, and she will start addressing me as madam. Alpana is forgotten. So that kind of culture. And I came from journalism. So there, even publisher, I worked for Business India. So Ashok Advani was our publisher and editor come publisher. So we used to call him Ashok. The editor who I directly work with was Radha or Basu or, names like that. And we were like first name basis. And here everybody is madam. So I'm here walking down the corridor and somebody says, madam, I turn back and see, and they are calling the peon who is walking besides me. So it was quite funny, I found. And I said, I think I have a nice name, which is Alpana. And why can't everybody call me Alpana? So anybody would call me and whatever, and I would immediately say, yeah, I'm Alpana or whatever. I wouldn't leave an opportunity to repeat my name. So slowly, and I think it must have taken about 10 years when I got first call from the regional director of Delhi. And I remember that so very clearly. And he called up and said, Alpana. So I was like, I have arrived. So it was not that people were not calling me before, but it was all like madam and, ma'am or whatever, and never by first name. Even colleagues, peers wouldn't call each other by name. But when the regional director of Delhi called me up and said Alpana and addressed me as Alpana and then conversed whatever he wanted to tell me, I was like, yeah, now I think we are ready for change. And now you have a culture where governor walks into deputy governor's room, executive director's room, they address each other by their first names. And and people came from outside, like Dr. Raghuram Rajan came from outside. And abroad, he is all known as Raghu. Nobody calls him Dr. Rajan or something. Dr. Urjit Patel came, and everybody addresses him as Urjit and never Dr. Patel or something. So Dr. Reddy was Venu for everyone, the peers in the government departments and peers in the RBI. So it started slowly changing over and modernizing itself. Now, if you see, the RBI top brass consists of people in their 50s, which was never heard of. Only by the time you reach retirement age, you would reach a position like an executive director or a deputy governor. Today, with Dr. Raghuram Rajan was 48 or 49 when he became the governor. Dr. Urjit Patel was even younger by a year or two when he became the governor. So the whole generation has changed, and younger people have taken over, and they think differently, they think technology, they think expertise, they think in terms of building up their knowledge base, going abroad, learning. All these things happen, and therefore the whole picture or the whole tapestry of the organization slowly has undergone a change. And that is the broad brush picture. But if you see, then, departments merging, abolishing, new departments coming, all has depended on the circumstances that have called for that kind of change. And RBI has never shied from changing itself if the circumstances so demanded. So,
I mean, that sounds amazing that, in a market which is evolving so quickly, we do need a regulator who does not shy from change.
absolutely.
Uh, that is good to know. Now, as a follow-up question, there was not enough policy reform in RBI in terms of internal hierarchy, and you were a grade of employee all the 26 years that you were at RBI. Do you think a reformation policy for internal hierarchy on the basis of expertise would have aided the RBI function?
In hindsight, you can say so. It's though I know for sure and I understand it completely well that it's very difficult to change things internally within the RBI, because a certain policy has been followed in terms of human resource development in RBI. And to change means you will at one go affect a lot of people who are real living beings and who have had aspirations of promotions, of becoming, somebody or the other, a deputy general manager or a chief general manager or an executive director, or even a deputy governor for that matter, because that's the highest position that an RBI employee can rise to. Now to with that aspiration, you suddenly make a U-turn in your HR policies and those aspirations come crashing down, you can think of the agony that that individual will go through. So having said that, the change is very difficult to make in HR policies. I also feel that an organization like RBI, a hierarchical organization like RBI, and this is true for all the banks and government organizations and everywhere, where the base is very large and the top as you go up becomes narrower and narrower. And there is only one position on top. Now, that position is always for RBI. Governor has always come from outside, appointed by the government. So that position, RBI person will never aspire for, but up to the deputy governor, he can go. And this whole building up of that pyramid happens over the years. And like I said earlier, today you are my boss and I become your boss tomorrow. And these kind of things keep happening depending on cycle of promotions that happen. Now, historically, RBI has had two lines of expertise. One is called the specialist category, which is all economists and statisticians and all people like me who are in the communication field. And the other is non-specialists. So we call them generalists. And that generalist category man all the departments which are non-research departments. So banking supervision, regulation, financial stability, fintech, your currency management, which occupies almost 50% of RBI staff. So all these departments, the regional manning of the regional offices, all these happen by these generalists. Now, I personally feel that marrying these two streams would help both the streams a lot, because today generalist people do not undertake any technical research in that sense, because there's no time left for them and no technical expertise available. Like if you tell me that some statistical model to be employed to examine this, that, and the other, I will not know, because I have not studied statistics. Whereas statistical department knows the statistical model, but it does not have the domain knowledge of that supervisory department or, banking balance sheets or any such thing. So if you marry these two somewhere, somehow, then probably there'll be enrichment of both the subject matter. And the RBI will gain a lot through that kind of merging. So I'm not saying entirely that there should not be two streams, but somewhere some seats can be created. Now those seats were created in Dr. Reddy's time. But somehow what happened was that not the very ablest of the person was posted in that place, but somebody who was disposable, who was rejected in promotion. So to give him that comfort of, not facing the crowd day in and day out after rejection, you place him outside so that he spends his 3 years and comes back. So those kind of people. So there was not much enthusiasm to do or show any skill or anything. So I feel there the system lacks. And the other thing is developing expertise in the same area. Now I can understand the policy of rotation to prevent corruption and too much of familiarity with one particular desk, and something can go wrong when you're dealing with finance. It cannot be as bad as in the banking system, because bank you directly deal with funds. Here you don't deal with funds, but with policies. But there can be scope for corruption or mismanagement or something. So what rotation of jobs is important, I accept. At the same time, you have so many departments which are related to each other. So let's say supervisory. So you have foreign exchange management where supervision is required, banking regulation, non-banking regulation, fintechs now for regulation, cooperative banking regulation. So within this also, if you rotate people, at the end of the journey, you will have an officer who is expert in regulating. Give him any kind of financial entity and he will be able to regulate them because he has worked in all these departments. So that kind of expertise is not encouraged very much. We started somewhere some small way in Dr. Rajan's time, but somehow it didn't succeed. And even today, there was an attempt made, but it has not succeeded because somewhere people, I don't know if it's lack of trust or lack of confidence within themselves. What, I don't know, but this has not happened in RBI.
Yes, I think even in other organizations, we do believe that a little bit of a mix-up, people going, working with other departments, people having domain knowledge of other things is very important. And there is, I guess, a lot of emphasis, in my personal opinion, I also feel we place too much emphasis on super specialization.
Yeah.
I mean, I always meet young people and they're like, I have only done this. And I'm like, I think you should be doing few other things as well. Uh, so, I mean, yes, it always adds value to you as a professional.
Very true, very true. Somewhere that balance has to be achieved, where not too much of specialization at the same time, not too much of generalist kind of characteristics also.
Yes,
That's
yes.
very difficult to achieve, I accept.
Um, and also then let's talk more about the press release division. That's become so important, and it's something that the outsiders from the RBI at least are very, very dependent on you guys.
Yeah.
So the manifestation of the first ever press release division to manage communications was in the early 90s. And whether methods of communication for internal communication engagement with market players and the actual notifications and announcements, were they ever different, or and starting from scratch, how did the PR division navigate to formulate policies around how to write and what to communicate? So how did you manage that?
That was a difficult thing. A lot of hard work went in, a lot of talking, lot of convincing of the departments and the higher ups, and it was hard work all throughout. But also, it so happened that I kept getting opportunities every point in time, and I never left that opportunity unworked. So when in 1996 we launched the RBI website, it was launched actually with our annual report. And annual report is a domain of Economic Research Department. They always wrote the annual report. Even today they write the annual report. Mainly because it's a balance sheet of not only the RBI, but also of the economy as such and the banking and finance system. So natural that they write it, but when Research Department published that annual report of 1996 and put it on the website, and then handed over the website to me, saying that abhi tum sambhalo. And that was I don't know, that opened up the entire gamut of subjects and opportunities of communicating to me, because I didn't know technology from Adams, the web technology, but I learned it on the way. And we had a very good web manager at that time who was also an upstart. Now he has also become very big and he's a multimillionaire. But at that time, he was just husband, wife, and one fellow who did the coding and all. So he was managing the website, and this I thought was a golden opportunity for me, because with website in your hand, your communication became instantaneous. Earlier, what would happen is we would write a circular, we would mail it to the banks, and it was the physical mail, the snail mail as we call it. So it would go by snail mail, and then in the dispatch department, it would lie for some 1 week. Then after that, it will get dispatched when it times come. And then the bank will receive it in chairman's office. Then it would open the envelope, see, mark it down the line. So that department will get it. Department will send it to branches. So it was like between we issuing a circular or an instruction to a bank and the bank actually implementing it for the customer, there'll be a gap of some 6 months. And this I'm saying 6 months just out of my hollow mind, I don't know, it could be taken more or less, or I have no idea. But with the website, it so happened that we would issue a circular and a pronto it will go on the website and the whole world could see it. So it became such a powerful tool in the hands of communication department that I used to run around to all the departments saying, circular though, let it go on the website first. Then they would say, no, you can't put it on the website first. It has to go to the banks first. I said, yes, but website allows you to reach it to the bank immediately. Why do you want to send it physically? And then it so worked out that gradually people started understanding it and they started giving it beforehand to me, saying that isko website pe dalna hai. Will you meet the deadline? Will you issue it today? I said, you give it to me. I don't need more than 10 minutes to put it on the website. And they would watch me like hawks, that, Are, gaya ke nahi, gaya ke nahi. And when they realize that I deliver, and the circular does go on the website immediately, and the banks are getting access to it and they're happy about it, then they started following it, chasing me. That, mera circular aane wala hai, tum website pe dalo. Be ready. It's going to go on the website now. And then I started building it up because internet gives you the technology of hyperlinking. You can go back on the time as much as you want to. So 1947, and that time bankers used to laugh at RBI, saying that, hey, RBI circular means it will begin from 1947 when the Banking Regulation Act came into being, and it will bring it up to date. And at the end of it, it will say what is to be done now. So I would go back to that 1947 circular, get the department to get it typed and give it to me and hyperlink it. So you didn't have to scram through the files and get that old circular and then, try to understand what RBI is trying to do. The other thing I did was changing the language. Now, circulars cannot be non-technical because Harshad Mehta scam only taught us that it has to stand in the court of law. So it had to have certain legalese, which could not be avoided. So what I started doing was I would leave the circular as it is, untouched. But if I knew that this circular is going to affect the bank customer as such, or general public as such, then I would insist on issuing a press release along with that. And in the press release, I would knock off all the peripheral and unessential things and just keep the gist of it, give the background of it, and the decision would come up front saying that RBI has decided XYZ, and this is the background. So people found it very easy to absorb and go to the bank and demand their rights. So it was difficult initially because every change in the word and people would take it personally, that ठीक तो लिखा था, क्या change किया? And I would make sure that whenever it was a complex press release or complex subject that I was handling, I would consult the department after changing the. It should not so happen that in editing, I kill the essence of the, the circular or the instruction. So I would always get it approved by the department, and they would more often than not lament. Are kyun tumko haath lagana hai isko, just let it go. But I would say, no, this is important. And then thankfully, the top management would always support me. They would say, no, governor ne approve kar diya, deputy governor ne approved kar diya. Abhi tum change mat karo usko. Then I would go to the deputy governor. I would say, sir, madam, this is what I feel and this is what I have done. Will you? And then they started insisting, Alpana, haven't you touched the press release? Look, it's so clumsy. It is so technical. Change it, they would say. So I would get a handle and I would go back to the department and say, hey, look, the deputy governor wants it. So please, let's change it. So it started working on both sides. So, and then people started slowly appreciating it. And from website, it went over to communicating in an easy way. So we started issuing advertisements. Then we started issuing television, small short films. Then the whole lot of financial literacy drive came up. So we made it further simplified. And efforts at simplifying communication, that simple English campaign came in between. And each and every governor, each and every deputy governor was supportive of easy communication. And the end of it was in the museum that we set up in Calcutta. And that was a phenomenal experience, because to communicate what RBI is, what money is, to a curious child of, say, eighth standard, or was a challenge. And with absolute free hand, we could set up that museum. And I highly recommend people to go and visit that museum, because it's come up very well, very well. And we have used games to teach concepts in finance. Subsidy, simple game of snakes and ladder, and you learn lessons in, what is right decision in finance and what is wrong decision in finance. And it's fun. It's fun.
I mean, ma'am, this is one of the reasons why this interview is so special to me, because, I mean, I want the world to know that you guys are the reason that now I'm happy to tell you that issue of the master directions and circulars of RBI, somehow they're happening on Friday. So for us, they're happening like a blockbuster release, you know. Sometime in the day, अरे RBI website पे और master direction आ गए, circular आ गए, पढ़ो, लिखो, and they go viral in like a few hours time. And
Right.
this has happened, that has happened. People are creating content, and to see that journey of how it happened from postal service, it's gone to this that has become instantaneous. And I believe I've worked a lot in the regulatory space, but RBI was one of the first regulators to actually cross-refer the old circulars,
Yeah.
say that, okay, this circular has now been repealed, it has been overruled, please refer to it that way. It was one of the first regulators in India to put that system in place. And
Yes.
now, literally in circulars and master directions, you will see that they will use a different color to say that, okay, this has been released at this time, so with effect from this time. And so it's always amazing to interview pioneers who have made
Absolutely.
this
Yeah.
possible.
Actually, that master direction also, all we have done is use the internet technology. So on the circular, 1st of January, the fresh circular is issued, master direction. And then the changes done throughout the year are incorporated in that itself through using track change method. So and at the end of the year, 1st January next year, all we do is we download the entire master direction with track change, except all the track changes, and put it as 1st January next year's new circular. And wherever that changes happened, then all redundant things are taken off. All that cleaning up happens throughout the year. So simply using internet technology, we have devised this. At any point in time, the market will get up-to-date instruction on a particular subject through the master direction.
That's amazing. That's seriously amazing.
Absolutely.
I'm coming to the tail end of my interview. And so, guys, if you have any questions, you please drop it in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of the screen. And so, ma'am, you were a journalist, and then you were, moving the PR division, public press release division in RBI. They were similar roles, but they were not the same. And how different was it? I mean, it's being on two different sides of a river, kind of a thing. So, how different was journalism from communicating for RBI? And if you could give us a parting thing on how how was your experience?
Actually, not very different, as you rightly pointed out, because I call it two sides of the same coin. I was outside and I was trying to get information from within the organization and publish it in a way that public would understand. So I was the interlocutor. And then when I entered the RBI, I was doing more or less the same thing, simplifying the RBI communication for the public at large, and then publishing it, either through a press release or putting it on the website. We devised FAQs on important topics, and then we started writing those FAQs ahead of time. So when this big circular or big decision was announced, we had the FAQs ready and it went simultaneously on the website. We started collecting all the information, the kind of dossiers on subjects, where I would divide them subject wise or concept wise and then publish it as a dossier. So all information on a subject at a point in time. So all these things, you have to be aware of the organizational need. You have to be aware of the world outside and its own need. And then you have to work a kind of balance between the two, because RBI is an institution where a lot of information cannot be given ahead of time. It has to come at a given particular time, but you can work. Nobody stops you from working behind the scene. And after having worked in the RBI for so long, people also started trusting me and giving it to me in advance to rework the things. So I would be ready with a press release. I would be ready with an FAQ at the time when we were actually announcing the decision. And that helped a great deal because, people wanted to have simplicity, clarity in whatever was communicated, like demonetization. The FAQs, of course, demonetization, I was not privy to that information. It had to be kept secret. So even I wasn't aware. But the moment it was announced, the department had kept the FAQs ready. First, I read the FAQs and the press release draft that was given to me for issue. I made little bit changes, but I first absorbed the information that was given there. So the whole night that I worked on that November day when the demonetization decision was announced, whole night I was on the phone explaining it to journalists and to general public what it all means for them and what they need to do. And for the public to know that somebody is available who is answering all the calls and giving correct information must have been such a relief that chalo koi to hai jo bol raha hai. And then I had received calls which said, madam aapka number. I said, where did you get my number from? They would call me on my mobile. So I said, kahan se mila number aapko? And somebody from UP, somebody from interior of country would call up. Said, नहीं मैडम आपका नंबर है इंटरनेट पे. I said, हाँ पर कैसे? नहीं. I said, this is there in the press release. You read, आप पढ़ लीजिए. नहीं नहीं, सबने बोला है कि अल्पना मैडम बोलेगी तो ही वो सही है, नहीं तो सही नहीं है. So that kind of trust to build and that kind of people to know that there is somebody who is responsive at the central bank. I think it was very, very crucial, and a lot of hard work paid up for me at that time. That, okay, being a journalist has helped because I can write simple English and I can explain the RBI's policy to a common man in a way that he would understand it. So that was the merging of the two roles, one also writing, understanding, meeting people inside RBI. I did the same thing, met people, gathered information, wrote about it in a simple language. So somewhere it was the same thing, but it was different in the sense that as a journalist, my job was to bring out the truth in the open, so to say, that journalistic kind of arrogance that we are bringing out the truth before the people. Whereas in RBI, you understand why a certain thing is not public or not made public beforehand. You try to retain that sacrosanctity of the communication and yet manage to communicate well. So that balance to bring in was a challenge in the RBI as an internal journalist for me. and the results are there.
That's very humble of you, ma'am. Uh, Thank you so much for sparing the time for this interview. And we hope we are able to do justice to its dissemination. With a tall task because, it's disseminating information regarding the queen of dissemination at RBI. So I am shaking in my shoes. Thank you so much for sparing the time to talk to us, ma'am.